What's a thesis statement? Some of this information you can get in your writer's reference, but I'd like to go over it anyway a little bit just because I think it's helpful anyway. How do I find a good topic or research question?
The first thing I'll say is research. You need to read about a topic in order to understand what academics and practitioners think is important. Okay? You might think you've got a certain idea about something, and maybe you do. Maybe you do know a lot about something, right? But you actually do have to go out and read some stuff and see what people say. There usually is a discourse, but you might actually have to get into some academic journals or some professional journals in order to find out what that argument is. What do scholars think are interesting questions in your topic? What questions are unanswered? Are there any puzzles to be solved? After looking at the evidence available, what do you think the right answer is? These are all things you need to think about. By the time you're done asking questions like this and doing research, you should be able to come up with a research question. That is, this is something that, seems to be an area of interest that I want to know more about. And as I said before, your provisional answer to that question is your hypothesis. And it's your thesis statement, right? That's your potential answer to that question. Now, like I said, maybe you're wrong and maybe you'll change it in 2 weeks and you'll write to me or whatever. That's cool, right? But at least for now, this statement, that's your hypothesis. That's what your thesis statement is.
So what is a hypothesis? It's an explanatory claim that's assumed to be true for the purpose of testing it to determine if it is in fact correct. Your purpose is not to sort of write a position paper or to write a position like, in my opinion, this is what I think, or, this is what I think, so I'm going to find a whole bunch of people who agree with me and get a bunch of quotes and throw it together and that kind of thing, right? This is something where you're posing an idea, an argument, and you're testing to see whether or not it's true, which means you're gathering data to sort of verify or challenge whatever that statement is. But the structure of the paper's purpose really is going to be to try to test to see whether or not this idea is valid, whether or not this is something that's true, which is extremely helpful in business because, they're all about the bottom line, and you need good data in order to make good arguments, in order to validate stuff. And so this is really where it all begins. So you make an educated guess, and you look at several different answers to questions or solutions. And then you use evidence to demonstrate that your hypothesis is valid, or technically can't be rejected. But suffice it to say, you're coming up with certain answers. Like, I'll come up with one, okay? What causes conflict? Okay? That's a good research question, right? That's probably been pounded to the ground by a number of academics for thousands of years, right? But, the point is it's still a good question. And you're not in a Ph.D. program. You don't have to come up with a new or unusual answer to this question, right? You just have to come up with some different ideas and evaluate those alternatives. Use what other people have come up with, try to figure out what you think is most valid. So let's say, your question is, what causes conflict? I don't know, what do you guys think causes conflict?
Miscommunication.
Miscommunication.
Assumptions.
Egos. Okay, I could go on and on and on and on, right? I could come up with 100 hypotheses, okay? Now, these hypotheses, you probably have already done some research at this point, and you've read what smart people have to say about it, so there probably are a bunch of different answers to this question, right? So what you're doing, you're asking what causes conflict, and you're saying, okay, is it miscommunications, is it ego, is it something else, right? And your thesis statement is going to advocate one of these things. That's going to be your argument, okay? And then what's awesome about that is that when you actually go to your paper, you have built-in alternative hypotheses. You have built-in competing arguments. So you can look at different sides of this argument and say, these people say this is the answer, these people say this is the answer, these people say this is the answer. We're going to look at the data and see what the most likely answer is. Okay? You may not be able to solve the what causes conflict problem in a paper. Okay? It's kind of big and not very focused and probably not the best question in the world for you guys. Okay? But I'm just trying to illustrate this is the process that you're going through as you're thinking about what a topic might be and what a thesis statement might be. Okay? You understand that? Okay. All right, cool. All right, so what's a thesis statement? A thesis statement has these characteristics. It expresses the central idea of your paper. Hopefully this is obvious, but nonetheless it's important. It usually appears in the first paragraph of your paper, generally as the first or the last sentence. Or if you have a longer introduction, it has some sort of a prominent place in the introduction, but it should be pretty obvious. Like, I shouldn't read your paper and say, oh my gosh, what's their thesis statement? If I don't know what it is, I mean, that's like a big goose egg. And on the rubrics, that's a major category. And if you get a 0 on that, that's like 10% of your grade. If I can't even tell what your thesis is. You're not writing a mystery novel, okay? Don't save your thesis for the end of the paper. In academic and professional writing, you need to clearly state what you intend to prove at the beginning or you will lose your readers. In fact, going back to emails, as a professional, the best strategy for an email when you're talking to somebody who you're selling to or somebody who's your boss or whatever, in the first sentence or two, you had better say exactly what that email is about or they are not going to waste time reading that whole email. I mean, you've got to get to the point. You know, people are busy, it's the internet, man. People are busy clicking all over the place. And if you aren't clear about what it is that you have to say and why you have to say it and what your argument is and what your point is, what are people going to do? They're just going to click away. They're someplace else, okay? If I'm reading a paper and I don't know what the answer to the question is, I don't know what the thesis is till the very end, I'm sitting here going, okay, so now why did this person write this paper again? I kind of know what it's about, I kind of know, and they ask a nice question and they're like, by the end, we shall discover what the answer is, right? You know, it's great, it's exciting, right? But get to the freaking point, okay? That's what you need to do. It's not a question, okay? Sometimes people turn in thesis to me and they give me a research question. Well, you do need a research question, right? You know, you're wanting to discover something that's new or interesting or whatever. But a research question itself is not a thesis. A thesis is the answer to the question, okay? So it's a statement. And it consists of one clear sentence, no more, no less. Now, your proposal might have more than that. Like maybe you're writing an introduction that leads up to this thesis. You're testing that out, right? Maybe you're giving me a direction or an outline or something where you're telling me, okay, this is what I think I want to do with this paper. I'm not so concerned about the standards regarding that. What I'm more concerned about is that you guys are able to write one strong, clean, clear thesis statement. Because if you can't do that, then you're going to have a really hard time with the rest of the paper. Are we cool with that so far? Mm-hmm. Okay. A thesis statement poses an argument. Okay? This is not an informative paper. We are making an argument, right? Something that you're trying to prove. You want to prove something that's not obvious. If it is obvious, then it's not a thesis statement, which we'll talk about a little bit more. So in academic thesis writing, you're making a statement that's not yet proven, right? A conclusion or claim, and you're using evidence and reasoning to try to prove that it's valid, that it's true. Now, what makes a good thesis statement? These are good questions to ask yourself as you sort of go through and evaluate whether or not you've met the requirements of the assignment. You know, does your thesis answer a question, propose a solution, or take a position on a debate? Does your thesis require an essay's worth of development? Are you going to run out of points too quickly? Can you support your thesis with evidence? Can you explain why readers will want to read an essay with this thesis? In other words, so what, right? Which is really an important purpose of the introduction of any sort of thing. Is like, you've got to make your reader understand why they should even bother, care, waste their time reading whatever it is that you've written, right? You've got to be able to answer those questions. You know, if the answer is no to any of those questions, it's back to the drawing board. Another thing that makes a good thesis statement is something called falsifiability. That means a thesis does not state the obvious, okay? If there's no arguments to say that your thesis isn't true, that is, no arguments to falsify it, then you don't have a thesis statement at all. It's probably not controversial. It's obvious. For example, here's a sample thesis statement.
Businesses should be culturally sensitive as they secure international contracts, or they might lose the deal.
Does that seem like a reasonable statement? I mean, I would agree with that, right? Isn't that true? Well, what's wrong with the argument?
Not true.
What did you say?
It's never
not true. Exactly. No, I want to go overseas and step on people's toes and make them mad. So yes, we're stating the obvious. So you can come up with great arguments, you can come up with great ideas, but if nobody's there sort of saying, yeah, I don't know, maybe there's a better way to do this, then you're wasting everybody's time. If somebody's trying to read your work, they're like, no duh. Okay? You don't want to write a no duh paper. Okay? So that's the reason why we have to deal with falsifiability. And this, quite honestly, is one of the most common things that causes me to throw thesis statements back to people. It's like, well written, it's a great topic, everything's great, but who's going to say no to that? Nobody, right? So in this case, you could rephrase it in different ways. Maybe the question isn't whether or not they should be culturally sensitive, but how should they be culturally sensitive? And that might make a good argument. Or, businesses obviously try to be culturally sensitive. Well, why do they fail, right? The answer to that question would be awesome, right? There's a good thesis statement. You probably got all sorts of people arguing about that. So just because this fails as a thesis statement doesn't mean it's a bad topic. It could be a great topic. You could open yourself up to all sorts of good ideas you could pursue, but you have to actually make sure that it's not just, totally obvious. So another thing to think about is, to test it, is ask if it can be reversed. Take your statement and ask if the opposite is true, right? Would anybody possibly say that they shouldn't be culturally sensitive? That's a reversal of the statement. Of course not, okay? So then that it's not falsifiable. Play the same trick on your own writing and see whether or not it works that way. If you can't negate your thesis by offering a competitive alternative, you have no thesis, okay? So maybe you have sort of more of a problem-solution sort of format, okay? If there's only one solution, then it's obvious, right? But if there's several different solutions you can compare, well, great. Then you can actually compare those solutions. Say, this is the best one. This one's better than the others. Or maybe these two work better than this one, right? You can construct that argument, but you have grounds for comparison. A good thesis statement can be reversed if the evidence takes you in a different direction, too. See, now that's kind of awesome, because what that means is, like, let's say that you've got a statement that actually works. It's actually good. Like, let's say, businesses can't always be culturally sensitive because of lack of resources. Okay? All right, so maybe that could be argued. I don't know. Maybe it's obvious, too. Let's just say that it's okay. Well, let's say you go into it and you just assume that, yeah, that's absolutely valid. That's probably lack of resources. But then you do more research and you realize, no, I'm sorry, I guess I was wrong. It was really something else. Okay? Well, guess what? If you've got a good research question, you can just flip your thing around and say, it's not resources, it's this. You've already done the research. You still have the same research question. You just insert the word not, and then you just reverse it. So you still have a good topic. And that's what makes a good thesis statement, is you can look at both sides of the evidence, try to evaluate it neutrally, and it either goes this way or this way, or maybe a third way, right? But you can look at that and actually weigh it and figure it out. You understand so far? Sort of, kind of cool? Okay.
Okay, so what about the proposal itself? You should write a page. Could be a provisional introduction to your paper. Should include a clear research question. It has to include a thesis statement. You should write about how you hope to prove your statement, what kind of evidence, how much it'll take to validate your argument. Get an idea of sort of what it is that you think you're going to need to do in order to make this thing work. If you don't know the answers to all these things, that's fine. You can say, I don't know, but just try, give it a shot, but at least come up with a hypothesis, a provisional thesis statement for me. Don't expect them to be perfect. We'll keep working on these things until they're solid enough to work. Cool? Okay.